The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur Event. I am the host, Solvinur. It's the 3rd of January 2015. So Happy New Year, everybody. There's a website you can go to. It's called UCY, is in the letters, not as in, UCY. So capital letters, UCY.tv. And there you will find lots of things, videos to check out. And if you mouse over shows, you'll get a list. The pull down menu comes up automatically. If you just mouse over it, and you can click on any of them to check out the different radio hosts that are on UCY. And if you click on Solvinur Event, you get onto the page where there is a chat room also. It's a combined chat room for every host, so you can find lots of things there. Almost 24/7. And you can talk to other people that are there. And especially if you are new to the quote-unquote alternative media. I don't even like the word alternative, right? Alternative just means another option, right? We are not just, as far as I'm concerned anyway, I wouldn't consider this kind of radio another option, like ABC is another option for CNN, right? So they're both the same, though, when it comes to the amount of propaganda that you get from mainstream media outlets like that. So, this is not that kind of media. So I think that the word alternative, as some other host pointed out, actually, and I had to agree with him, I don't remember the name, but he said that it's a bad name for it. And I agree. So, what's up, everybody? How you doing? You can join in on the radio if you like. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons that I also, there are many reasons, but one of the reasons that I also make radio is that I get to communicate with people. It's like pretty lonely, because most of the people are brainwashed, mind-controlled, indoctrinated, and they can't have a normal conversation with these people. It's just impossible. You will either be called a nutcase or get thrown some other ad hominem at you, like non-believer, right? If you're talking about global warming, you don't buy into the hype, you're a non-believer. Can you believe that? Shows you how much of a religion that is. So if you want to join us on radio, you can do so by contacting me at Skype, via Skype, and I will drag you on and we can make some talk. So contacting me at Skype goes as follows. Assuming you have Skype, you send me contact request to Solvinur, that's Solvinur. Solvinur, alright, I hear a bleep bleep. You should check that. Ah, awesome, thank you. I just got permission to play some John Taylor Ghetto for you guys. How about that, huh? Would you like to hear that? Guys, would you like to hear some John Taylor Ghetto? That will be nice. So, let me put this in the chat also. Blah, blah. There. You can also contact me at solvinur2@yahoo.com. SOLVINUR, the number 2@yahoo.com. And we can take it from there. You can ask me any questions and I'll see what I can do with it. So I got my coffee and my cigarette, so I'm all set for today's event. And I was planning on doing the rest of the Trivium PDF and then play some John Taylor Ghetto, if you guys like that, anyway. It would be nice. He's been Teacher of the Year in New York a couple of times, and he has lots of interesting things to say. Welcome people in the chat at the moment. One Anon, one Cap, Vincent, Hopper, and another Anon, which is not really an Anon because he actually registered with Anon 37001. Yeah, so welcome everybody. Beat the hell out of that keyboard. Yeah, Cap. You can hear that because the microphone is really close to the keyboard. Yeah. So you guys have heard of John Taylor Ghetto before, right? So let me know in the chat. I'll probably play it anyway, even if you don't want to hear it. Yeah. Because I really think it's important to get what he says known to everybody, you know, and not to fall in the fallacy of appeal to authority here, but, you know, he was a teacher. So, and he talked about that as well at a certain point. He says that he didn't want to hurt the children anymore, which is what is going on at schools. You know, children are being hurt a lot, actually. The creativity is being diminished, and it's the whole idea of appeal to authority comes back there a lot, because if the teacher says so, well, then it must be true. Which in a lot of cases it isn't. And in most cases, I would think that it is not deliberately done so by the teacher, because the teacher is mind-controlled himself also, you know. So he doesn't check the facts either, because he's also committing appeal to authority when he became a teacher, to get that certificate that, oh, I'm a teacher now. You know. So, Dan, welcome, and Happy New Year to you too, buddy. So let's get into the last bit of the final trivium.pdf. We've got about 25% to go or so. And last time the word civic, and civilization, civil came to pass, and I've already said enough about that. So keep that in mind, because the word civic is coming back again. Andrew Klein, PhD, believes that rhetorical skills is essential to civic life. To take the description from the Rhetorica blog, continues here, I want to add in that yesterday Hal Anthony was played twice in a row, and I like that. I like listening to him. And I noticed that he was talking trivium also, because he said that, or something to this effect, there are people listening, but I don't know if they understand and act upon the knowledge that they receive. Something like that. Listening is the grammar part. The understanding of what you're listening to is the logic part. And then acting upon what you have learned is the rhetoric part. See, so there's the trivium. In just one sentence he puts it all. So check that out, Hal Anthony. Hal Anthony. If you type that into Google, you will find more of him available. Continuing here, the Rhetorica Network offers analysis and commentary about the rhetoric of journalism, politics, and our culture. Alright, I don't get this sentence, the last bit of it, that is. I mean, rhetoric of journalism and politics, you can imagine journalists and politicians. But what about rhetoric of our culture? What we're talking about here is somebody practicing culture, or how do we understand this? I don't get it. The whole idea that government has put in place a department of culture is very telling. It's the people that define the culture, not the government. But, nowadays it's the other way around. Our culture is being created. Social Darwinism comes to mind, This site features the Rhetorica web blog, a rhetoric primer, a primer of critical techniques and information for citizens. Yeah. The character of Rhetorica represents the purposes and canons of classical rhetoric. His dissertation, Understand and Act, Classical Rhetoric, Speech Acts, and the Teaching of Critical Democratic Participation, will sometimes, while sometimes a bit technical, relates the importance of rhetorical skill in the ability to navigate the political landscape. Yeah. So why would you try to want to navigate the political landscape is my question. Morning JJ, what's up buddy? It's a snake pit, so why bother with it at all? The study claims that students do their best work when their learning is connected to their vital civic and political interests. Wow. Vital civic and political interests? The word vital to me, it means important, right? Right. Well, so that which is important is water, food, shelter. Those are the important things, not politics. Students should be given the opportunity to explore their vital interests as active agents. What? Critical democratic participants in a polis. Polis is city, right? If I'm not mistaken. So we're agents now? What's going on here? This study demonstrates a method of engaging students through critical reading and responding to political text written by for the presidents of the United States. Written by and for. Let's try this again. This study demonstrates a method of engaging students through critical reading and responding to political texts written by and for the presidents of the United States. Yeah, I doubt presidents write their own speeches at all. So, but there you go. Alright, so I have no problem with critically looking at what these people say, but there's no use in responding to that. Absolutely no use. Hal Anthony will also make that clear for you. It's with topics like this, civic life, where the potentials of rhetoric really come through. The ability not only to know what to say and when, but also when not to say anything is powerful beyond belief. Yeah. Our words carry our intentions and display our character. The use of rhetoric in marketing and advertising is clear to anyone interested. But those aims are so much lower than the pursuits of cultural and political influence. Almost every successful politician is effective because they know the means of rhetoric. Yeah. I would add to that that it is because how our mind works. You know, it's not that they are not only that they are effective because they know the means of rhetoric, it's also because that's how we tick. You know, we fall for it. We don't use the trivium as a weapon against people that try to influence you. Right, so there's two sides to that. Every culturally influential person's speech and behavior can be analyzed for the means of rhetoric that were used, most often unknowingly. No, not most often unknowingly, especially not in the media or politics. Or sometimes even in your local town, at the town hall meeting. There are spies, what's the word I'm looking for? There are spies there. There's a word that should be in between there also, but that use techniques known as Delphi to get certain things through, right? So there's nothing unknowingly about that. Whether or not you know it, rhetoric exists and it's right there in front of you and all around you. Yes. Most of us do not know what the basics of political life are, who the movers and shakers are, or how to engage effectively in that world. Well, to put it short, in very short terms, it's a puppet show. You know? So the movers and shakers are the ones that have their hands in the puppets. We are not taught in public schools how to run a successful political campaign, how to delegate process works, how the delegate process works, how to use Robert's Rules of Order. Yeah. I remember William Roberts talking about that also. Or even who our precinct chairs are. Alright, even my lack of English knowledge springs up here. Delegate, precinct chairs. I really don't know what that is, guys. Maybe you can tell me. Contact me at Solvinur at Skype at Skype at Solvinur, SOLVINUR, and I'll get you on air. We don't know what gerrymandering is. No, I don't. Or why term limits need to be set and revolving doors need to be closed. Yeah. Like Bill Cooper pointed out in the previous today's Bill Cooper hour, that Christian Amanpour is actually married to James Rubin. You know, if you find out who James Rubin is, then you will know what task Christian Amanpour has. It's quite simple. We are politically impotent, he says. We are totally ignorant of the duties entrusted to us. Yeah. And I think with the combination of study groups and the tools of learning, we can uplift the social and political environment directly for the good of the people. Alright? I don't think that's possible. I don't think you can fix this system from within. It's not going to happen. The only way, and you know, unfortunately, I have come to this conclusion. The only way that we can bring the system down is by not participating. I've said that before, right? Don't do anything. Yeah. Part 3, emotional and physical. In this section, I introduced the idea that the intellectual art should not be learned at the expense of the emotional character and physical well-being. We learn and think best when our body is vital and our spirit is strong. The goal is to connect our head, our heart, and our hands. The first degree, capital letters here. Sounds a bit Mason-like, doesn't it? Working tools. Let me make a diversion from the central course. My focus on the trivium. My focus is on the trivium, but I think it would be a great disservice to you to leave out the considerations of emotional and physical development. In fact, I believe that intellectual development is stifled until the body and soul are healthy and strong. For the next few pages, I want to make some remarks about this issue and give only some suggestions to you about what can be done. As with most of this essay, I am putting these ideas out there for you. It's up to you to do your homework. Earlier I mentioned that I wanted to come back to discussing the system that Freemasons use. Yeah. The one that puts the liberal arts in a certain context. To recap, they separate their learning into 3 degrees. Really? Seriously? The first, entered apprentice, focuses on the emotional self. The second, fellow craft, so not like World of Warcraft, focuses on the intellectual self. And the third, Master Masons, focuses on the spiritual self. Yeah. This, my thinking is, this is straight from Plato. Yeah. There is only one self. Right? You can get pretty confused if you're saying like, well, I am my emotional self, I am my intellectual self, I am my spiritual self, you know? There's only one self, and that's you. This is like what Plato says. What I like about this system is that they have the student work on their emotional character and moral development before learning the powerful intellectual arts. He says here, my intention is not to promote Freemasonry, but I want to highlight my agreement that students should work on their emotions before or alongside their intellectual development. Alright, I'm glad that he says that his intention is not to promote Freemasonry. The powers of the mind are amazing. Just look around at any city and realize that it was constructed by people who used their thoughts to plan the buildings, streets, canals, etc. Yeah. I don't like the whole idea of city. It's city has to do with like a sheep in a pen. You know, domestication. That's what it is. Domicile, right? Domesticated. The problem is that we have advanced so much technologically that our emotional selves haven't had a chance to catch up. We have a plethora of technology and capability, but a deficit of soul. Now he's using the word soul. Our educational departments want us to focus more on math and science, but less on arts and humanities. As humans, we need both the arts and the sciences to realize the full potential. It's with that in mind that this discussions about Mason symbolism takes place. Oh, really? Freemasons teach through ritual and lecture, using symbolisms, metaphor and allegory. Symbols are focal points for attention, objects that can become like a living force within the soul of our inner life. Have any of you guys in the chat actually responded to my question if you guys want to hear John Taylor Gatto? You guys even listening? Symbols are focal points for attention, objects that can become like a living force within the soul of our inner life. They are endless sources for contemplation and revelation. Well, I would say that symbols are used to control us. Through analogy, they point us towards higher ideals about self. Yeah. Higher ideals about the self, and then he has a self capitalized here with capital S. And meditating upon them opens up within us new angles and cognition of and understanding. Alright? Writing self with a capital S is very, very new age. So be careful with that. Dan, to answer your question, last week, my old modem, it broke down. I've had that thing for like 10 years or so. And, alright, good to know that you're still listening, guys. And so I had to order a new one. The new one is in now, and it's blinking and it's working, so we should be fine for the next 10 years. Yeah. But watch out, people, when you read stuff that has capital letters in the middle of a sentence, like nature or earth or self or whatever. It's deification or other New Age related pointers. Alright, while there are numerous symbols each Mason is required to learn about, I am only going to talk about 4 symbols of the first degree. Alright, so I'm going to learn something new. There's actually 4 symbols that pertain to the first degree. It's the rough ashlar, which reminds me of a Rosicrucian idea. They also have this rough diamond. The gavel, the chisel, and the 24-inch gog. What the heck is a gog? G-A-U-G-E. I'm sorry guys, I'm going to have to put this into Google and check out what that is. G-A-U-G-E. You know, my English is not that... Oh, it's a kind of meter. Uh-huh. One to measure something. Huh. Alright. The rough ashlar, right, as far as I know, an obelisk could be seen as an ashlar. Put this back on chat so I can keep an eye on that. The rough ashlar is an uncut stone brought from the far-away quarry that must be cut into proper shape, the perfect ashlar, in order to be used to build the temple. And here he has temple with a capital T. This represents the apprentice that must work to improve himself before truly becoming a master. Yeah. In order to cut this ashlar to its proper form, what's that, a 12 gog? How do we even pronounce that word? I don't even know how to pronounce that. G-A-U-G-E. Gag? What the heck, Cap? Alright. The gavel. Alright. In order to cut this ashlar to its proper form, the apprentice uses 3 working tools. What the heck are the 3 working tools? Oh, that's the gavel, of course, and the chisel and the gauge. 24-inch gog. How do you pronounce that? The gavel represents energy and action. It's the masculine force that seeks to bring passion into a situation. The gavel could become reckless and be used to cause a great harm, so it must be brought into focus. The chisel, sometimes representing education, is the feminine aspect that uses its discernment to guide the gavel's energy in order to make proper cuts into the ashlar, or proper changes in the apprentice's life. The chisel keeps the gavel from swinging wildly and causing harm, giving it purpose. These working tools are balanced by the 24-inch gog, which represents the ability to know what angle to hold the chisel at. Angle, right? Degree, see? Say gauge with a G. Gauge. Ah, thanks, Cooper. And how much force should go into the swing in order to make perfect right angle cuts? Ooh, Masons and right angles. They love them, don't they? The gog also represents the 24 hours in the day. Alright, so the fact that these Masons are so obsessed with right angles shows you that it's unnatural, right? Those right angles, they make me think of domestication. You see the square buildings everywhere, you know? The gauge also represents the 24 hours in the day, and so it is a symbol for time management, spelled with a capital T and capital M. A subject that every successful person is familiar with. Define successful. Okay, guys, listen. I'm gonna play some John Taylor Ghetto for you guys, because otherwise we will not have time for the first part. There's 5 parts to it. So listen carefully. He's much better at explaining things than I am. He's a teacher, not me. Yeah. So listen up. The first part of a 5-part series, I think it's 5 parts. It takes about 1 hour and 20 minutes. So we have to start this now, otherwise we're not going to make this. Alright? So listen carefully, guys. I'm very glad that what's his name? I keep forgetting names. I'm so sorry about that. Richard Grove gave me permission to play this. So, here we go.
Greetings and welcome. I'm your host and navigator, Richard Grove, and this is a very special interview episode of What You've Been Missing, featuring the gentle tone, scholarly insights, and wealth of wisdom that combines in the form of John Taylor Gatto, the legendary educator, author, and icon of liberty who offers a lifetime of perspectives on the origins, intentions, and destiny of the compulsory public school system. This 5-hour journey represents a landmark in American history and was filmed over 2 days on July 4th weekend 2011 in the Constitution State of Connecticut. This is a comprehensive interview session which not only memorializes John's life's work, but also embodies a return of our birthright as human beings. Truly an event which is relevant and relative to each and every one of us. This message applies to children and adults, parents and grandparents, students and teachers, administrators and politicians, blue collar, white collar, no collar, everyone who uses words and symbols to meet their needs, everyone who depends on accurate information to thrive and survive in this world. The purpose of this interview with John is to provide each and every individual with the essential facts which pertain to our survival here on Earth, both as individuals and as a species, and yet have been censored from our public schooling. The envisioned outcome would be for each and every human being to possess the knowledge and understanding which allows them to exercise intellectual self-defense and self-liberty, thereby succeeding in pursuing and attaining happiness. It's designed to be shared and studied by individuals and groups to provide the evidence, organize the ideas, and facilitate the constructive conversations and actions necessary to address the root causes of our ever-growing incoherence as human beings. Since this interview contains over 200 footnotes and references and discusses the contents of more than 30 classic books essential to understanding life here on Earth, I would humbly recommend that your first viewing be invested into just soaking in this information and consider it for yourself, and after thinking about it, to then view it again with the intent of looking up the references to embolden your understanding and clarify the focus of your new, expanded perspectives. This interview session could be screened over 5 hours, 5 months, or 5 years, as it could take that long to consume the primary and secondary source materials referred to herein. Most importantly, what you get out of the ultimate history lesson will be in direct proportion to the amount of attention and focus that you can invest into it. As each hour of the interview progresses into another, you are literally crossing thresholds of discovery. And by hour 5, the layers of these discoveries yield a truly inspiring realization. That being said, the conversation which forms the entirety of this interview is almost entirely composed of facts and references pointing toward a preponderance of evidence, which is, for the most part, unknown to the general public. And it has everything to do with the myriad of crises which face humanity, starting with our own incoherence and inability to problem solve our way forward. We're not asking you to agree with us nor to believe what we're saying. We're simply trying to provoke you into looking into these matters for yourself by providing you with an accurate map which leads to your own factual and substantial understanding of reality. For as Aristotle once wrote, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Through these interview sessions with John, you're going to be introduced to a variety of historical personalities and, we hope, curious to review the history which has led us to this point. And to that end, this is not about disproving or debunking what we've been taught so much as it is a journey of discovery to discern reality and to discover our birthright as human beings, so that we might go forward in order to meet the challenges we all face here on this planet together. This is truly something that corporate establishment media, public schools, and universities cannot afford to teach us. So without further ado, let us begin, as they say, at the beginning. On December 15th, 1935, John Taylor Gatto was born in western Pennsylvania in the coal mining and steel milling town of Monongahela, about 35 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. During his early school years, he spent a year at an elite Jesuit boarding school near Latrobe, Pennsylvania, where, as you'll soon hear, he learned to think dialectically and was beaten sufficiently by the nuns to create his outspoken temperament, which has endured lifelong. John did undergraduate work at Cornell University, the University of Pittsburgh, and Columbia University, and then served in the United States Army Medical Corps at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and Fort Sam Houston, Texas. Following Army service, John did graduate work at the City University of New York, Hunter College, Yeshiva University, the University of California, Cornell, and Reed College, which is a private independent liberal arts college located in Oregon. Like many famous American iconoclasts, John first honed his skills in a variety of professions before finding his talent for teaching, which proves to be his real gift to this world. After almost 30 years of teaching in New York City's inner city schools, he was named New York City Teacher of the Year in 1989, 1990, and 1991, and that same year was also named New York State Teacher of the Year. Later in 1991, he wrote a letter announcing his retirement from teaching titled, "I Quit, I Think," to the op-ed pages of the Wall Street Journal, stating that he no longer wished to, quote, hurt kids to make a living, end quote. Soon thereafter, he was the subject of a show at Carnegie Hall titled An Evening with John Taylor Gatto, which then launched a career of public speaking in the area of public school reform. He then began a worldwide public speaking and writing career and has received several awards from libertarian organizations, including the Alexis de Tocqueville Award for Excellence in the Advancement of Educational Freedom in 1997. John has been invited to speak all around the world to share his research and has spoken to audiences in Australia, Spain, France, England, Mexico, China, and Canada, as well as every one of the 50 American states. Since his public resignation in 1991, he has traveled over 3 million air miles, spoken at Harvard University, NASA Space Center, the White House, Smith College, Cato Institute, and many other places. He's also been a keynote speaker at over 30 state homeschool conventions, and he supports something called unschooling and open source education for personal learning. In his book, Weapons of Mass Instruction, here's how John defines open source education. Open source learning accepts that everything under the sun might be a possible starting point on the road to self-mastery and a good life. In open source, learning sequences are personally designed or personally signed off on, and everyone you encounter in life is a potential teacher. In open source, teaching is a function, not a profession. Everyone learns and everyone can teach themselves how to learn anything, as well as learning how to teach others. In open source, students are the active initiators. You learn that you either write your own script in life, or by default, without your input, you become an unwitting actor in someone else's script. The main thesis of John's body of work can best be illustrated, in my opinion, by asking the question, what do public schools actually teach children? And answering it with the main themes contained in John's first book, printed in 1992, titled Dumbing Us Down. He makes the following observations about how public schools are designed in form and function. Public schooling teaches confusion by breaking coherence. It presents an ensemble of information that the child needs to memorize in order to stay in school. Public schooling teaches them to accept their class affiliation. Public schooling makes them indifferent and suppresses natural curiosity. Public schooling makes them emotionally dependent on approval from authority. Public schooling also makes them intellectually dependent on experts and authorities to think on their behalf. Public schooling teaches them a kind of self-confidence that requires constant confirmation by experts and authorities, also known as provisional self-esteem. Public schooling makes it clear to them that they cannot hide, that they are always supervised, under surveillance, especially in today's society where everything online is tracked. Information is sold in a variety of ways to a variety of predators. Bibliography. John's poetic prose and diligent documentation can be studied in his prodigious preponderance of publications, including Dumbing Us Down, The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling, 1992, The Exhausted School, 1993, A Different Kind of Teacher, Solving the Crisis of American Schooling, 2000, The Underground History of American Education, 2001. And in my opinion, this is an essential book to read as it stimulates your internal dialogue and draws questions as to why are children being methodically undermined, while simultaneously providing you with the answers and comprehensive references. John also published an article called Against School, published by Harper's Magazine in 2003, and last but not least, Weapons of Mass Instruction, a school teacher's journey through the dark world of compulsory schooling, 2008. John's website is johntaylorgatto.com, and you can help him fund his current projects, sample the underground history of American education, and browse his bookstore. We've also created a special website to support your further study of this project, theultimatehistorylesson.com, which acts as a single point of access to all the media, references, notes, and source materials and bonus features associated with this interview set. Realizing that releasing this information is not enough, we've invested a great deal of effort into organizing and providing you with the research library and all the tools, methods, and resources that you'll need to learn your way forward following this interview. Possibly one of the most useful tools is our use of the personal brain software to enter, organize, and connect all of this information into a comprehensive big picture, literally helping you to connect all of the dots of useful information and formulate a useful understanding. We use the brain internally to help us organize the plethora of prolific facts, artifacts, and personalities that we've encountered while attempting to understand the nature of public education. In addition to hosting the brain models, the ultimatehistorylesson.com also hosts the video files for this interview set, as well as the audio-only versions of this interview in MP3 and CD format so that you can listen to it on the go. This site also hosts the footnotes, links, references, and PDF versions of the classic books discussed, and in the near future we'll be adding subtitles and translation into multiple languages and much more. The ultimatehistorylesson.com links you to our educational media producing partners, as well as the Tragedy and Hope online community, wherein you can leverage the research, methods, and tools in an international online community designed to be a fear-free zone of mutual respect wherein individual explorations are shared to empower everyone with a comprehensive understanding. The Tragedy and Hope online community is free to those who need it and sponsored by the individuals who can afford to support our educational projects. And since this project was funded by more than 50 individuals in the Tragedy and Hope online community, I would especially like to thank those of you who gave us the ability to invite John and produce the Ultimate History Lesson so that this empowering information can be understood worldwide. We also produced the Peace Revolution podcast, a virtual classroom for adults, designed to point out and provide useful perspectives, resources, and organized information. Each episode contains a subject of study essential to understanding a comprehensive view of reality, all of which is focused on providing you with the history, contextual information, and references, and the various methods and tools so that you can learn for yourself that which public schools cannot afford to provide. Specifically, we've produced episodes 41 through 45 of the Peace Revolution podcast, which feature all 5 hours of this interview coupled with historical analysis and commentary, which we provide to help you really understand what's being said. These episodes amount to another 15 hours of educational content, which is also available on theultimatehistorylesson.com, providing you with the metaphorical handles, if you will, so that you can grasp this material and use it to your own advantage in everyday life. Unlike any other interview you've ever witnessed, the conclusion of the Ultimate History Lesson is actually the starting point on your own personal journey of discovery. Due to the fact that we're trying to do something that hasn't yet been done, I've edited each hour of this interview such that from the crack of the slate until the end of the tape, you're witnessing John in a natural and forthright representation of his presence, and nothing he states in the coming hours has been taken out of order, out of context, or otherwise adjusted for theatrical purposes, as I feel that it would not be to anyone's benefit to change the flow of energy as it happened. These interview sessions are designed to resurrect your curiosity, stimulate your use of reason, inspire you to look around, provoke you into asking questions, sparking your creativity and your inventiveness, igniting the solution-making process in each and every one of us. Its function is to provide you with a ramp to learning, discussion, respectful debate, and compassionate forms of communication, as well as constructive action. Here's hour one of our interview with John Taylor Gatto. It's time to begin the Ultimate History Lesson. Thank you for tuning in and not dropping out. You know, for pushing that button, you get a camera credit. That's pretty good. Awesome. I don't even know that we'll need the slides necessarily. I mean, we can start by talking about that.
Father, Son, Holy Ghost.
Grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So grammar is the Son, logic is the Father, the Holy Ghost is rhetoric, and God is the consciousness. And so the Christian trivium came from the Greek trivium, but they used a metaphor to encode it. Now my question to you is a metaphor a lie, or is a metaphor something else?
I think we better start a little less abstract. One of the things, a fatigued old brain. I arrive at abstraction by arguing with myself through writing. So everything I write goes through about 20 drafts. And since I handwrite it, it's quite painful to read and throw it out. But I don't really know what I say, what I'm going to say, or what I believe until I actually argue with what I think I believe. So,
what do you think you believe about schooling?
I think I believe that the metaphor schooling clearly tells you what it's expected to deliver. We only use the expression one other way commonly, and that's for the school of fish. And they are wonderful to watch. When one fin moves, all of them move. Thousands of fins move. And they're instantly receptive to what the group wishes. I don't know who gives the original signal, but education's diametrically opposite to that. I think it starts with the assumption that we get from a fingerprint or from DNA that no two people are alike, and that the ultimate realization of yourself is to find that uniqueness where your apparent physical resemblance to everybody else sort of dissolves as an illusion, and you stand absolutely alone, or you can select when you want to be part of the larger group. It seems clear to me that the business of schooling has done what Orwell clearly saw you do, or what Walter Lippmann said you do back in the 1920s. You steal the key language of the person the group you want to overthrow, and you redefine it, and people then become confused. It's Newspeak in 1984. So the schooling transformation occurs when they see that the language of education is highly regarded, highly respected, and even in people who don't participate, there's an urge in that direction. So you simply take the concepts and you claim that that's why people are being ritualized. So there.
So you describe that individual beings, when in groups, kind of subvert their own individual thinking power. And the law of identity, none of us can change who we are. We have to be ourselves, and that is constant throughout life. So it's about figuring out how to remain individually self-reliant and self-sufficient as going through these systems that are trying to change us and to make us less self-reliant and more.
Very much so. And I think the awareness of these contrary dynamics is what gives rise to the theories of dialectic. I mean, Aristotle all the way through history, the variety of them, but they participate in the same way, is essentially asking you for your own self-defense, not to assume that what anyone says, especially as they climb the authority ladder, is the truth. Often the misinformation comes from innocent self-delusion, but just as often as you move up the power pyramid, it comes from a malign intent toward your own individuality.
So it's like a betrayal of truth that occurs, or a betrayal of belief in some authority structure that you want to believe in is true, and then little by little you realize that it's not necessarily how it might have been presented to you.
Right, even in your own individual inner life and consciousness. Before the cameras rolled, I said the way I learn what I'm thinking is to write something down that I think I believe, and then I argue with it, and it never survives. How about that? Now, what scares me is that when I go back to it year after year, most of it doesn't survive. I mean, it takes years before I get to a core and I say, I'm not personally capable of moving beyond this thing, so that we're so well conditioned from infancy not to see the truth or relate the truth, but to shave it, that the first step in reaching for an education, I think, is to mistrust what you most are certain of, to mistrust that. Now, it may survive, but it needs tested not once until you're exhausted from testing it.
Is the school system designed to get kids to grow into a thriving, self-responsible, self-reliant adult? Or is it to whittle away curiosity and to kind of stop them from thinking for themselves?
It's certainly not the former in any way, for the simple reason that throughout history, management doesn't know how to manage independent units, even partially independent units. Why shouldn't we ask, and any school people watching your film should begin immediately to ask politely, why are we doing it? It's a question you never hear because it's heresy. I mean, the beleaguered classroom teacher doesn't know why he or she's doing that. They're told to do it. Maybe they can give it 5% personal spin. That's why they're doing it. Does it make sense for this particular life that's asking the question? You don't know, and if you started to care, the logic of schooling would dissolve. No one is able. You can answer the question for yourself. I used to say to my classes, and over the course of 30 years teaching, I taught kids from the Gold Coast to the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and I taught kids from the center of Harlem and Spanish Harlem. And I would say to all of them, you have a right at any time, you gotta be polite though, because I'm just human, to say, why are we doing this? And if I can't produce an answer that convinces you that I believe it, then you have a right to opt out and do something else as long as you don't run wild and bring the whole house down. It helped me grow year after year. Not that they ask very often because they're conditioned not to do that, but enough did ask that I was put on my own mettle to say, why am I doing this? And it was a continual expansion of my own insight until politically I couldn't do it any longer. The school, oddly enough, made me so internally famous that it drew extra attention, and my system couldn't survive under the scrutiny because they would see the disparity between what I was doing and what the protocols were. So there.
So it sounds like if I'm trying to get to the root cause of why your teaching career ended, it sounds like you started asking questions, John. And it sounded like the question started with why with a question mark, and then maybe you were asking some other, like, the 5 W's plus how, and you were actually getting observed knowledge.
Asking myself questions, then forcing my classes to ask me questions and themselves questions, and eventually the productive output of my classes was so great, inadvertently, I didn't care how the school measured product, but it was so great that I would get visiting delegations, sometimes on a daily basis, for months, and they would leave baffled because they wouldn't see the drama unfolding that they understood as schooling, and they were right. It was less and less schooling, and eventually the pressure became impossible since I set out at the beginning of the year with an inner intention, if I had 120 kids, to have 120 individually written curricula. I never succeeded totally, but I got close enough that when the principal would drop by and only find 9 people in class and say, where are the rest, that I ran out of strategies to explain where the rest were. So I couldn't operate. I couldn't function any longer because my physical strength wasn't up to it. So
how did part of the strength of your actual teaching come from releasing children from the classroom and letting them go out in the world and actually gain some useful experience?
Huge amounts of it came from releasing anyone who had an independent course to follow, becoming that boy or girl's assistant, always with the mother's permission, because they couldn't deal with that kind of additional political pressure. So what they would learn and bring back would be like food for me. I would be like I was 120 people simultaneously. Well, I learned much more than I learned at the 2 Ivy League colleges I attended. I used to say to my wife, and it sounds fanciful, as though, oh, he must love children, which is not true. I love people, and people can be 5 years old, but people who suck their thumb and rattle and extend childhood. School's intention is to artificially extend childhood, and there really is no practical terminus for that. If they can extend it through graduate school and postgraduate.
What is the actual reason that their childhoods are being extended? How does it start with this?
I think what we never discuss, or that the extreme left has preempted to discuss, so they marginalize themselves, is the intimate interrelationship between the economy and the way we train the young. To the extent that we once had a wildly variegated economy. I'm quoting Abraham Lincoln in 1859, famous speech of the Wisconsin Agricultural Association. Lincoln said, I call this mudsill theory because he used that term. Lincoln said the British are financing the whole Western movement, and they're attempting to reinstall their class system. And so they send their young sons over to make sure that not a whole lot of attention is paid to ordinary people or people who live in simple homes that have mud sills. He said they're not, according to the British thinking, they're not worth training or worrying about because there's no way they can possibly improve. Lincoln said, look around you. 3/4 of our population has an independent livelihood, and the quarter who doesn't works to put a little stake together to set up on their own and write their own script in life. He said, as a consequence, we don't have proletariat as they do in Britain and Germany and the European nations, and we aren't able to have a factory system where it exists in this country, which is in New England, in the textile industries. A factory will have 30 or 40 employees. They'll usually be young women waiting marriage. They'll be served tea at their machines, and there'll be opera performances staged just to keep them at the machine, because these independent livelihoods lead to, totally private, independent systems of value. So the British are wrong, but of course the Civil War changed that. We're sold that it was a great crusade against slavery by the school system. The major historians who've turned their attention to that say, to a person, that slavery was already dead. It was staggering through its last couple of generations, not because of a moral transformation on the part of plantation owners, but because the wives of the plantation owners were scratching their head and saying, the husband vanishes for a couple of days. We have all these new slaves, and they're not black anymore. They're various shades of brown. So I'm thinking right now, I think Vern Parrington, but a number of historians 50 years ago said slavery was on its last legs because the Southern womanhood wouldn't stand for it any longer. Russia, I believe, had freed the serfs. Britain and the continent had done this thing. We were going to do it too. But it gave a nobility to the necessity to get rid of the Southern politicians who were trained in dialectical thinking, in rhetoric, and could run circles around the Northern politicians in Congress. They could produce the most compelling arguments for this or that. And so the South had to be gotten rid of.
From my understanding, those dry goods like cotton from the South that were produced by slaves were then going to factories in the North. And the factory owners in the North figured out that the slave owners were paying too much overhead. It cost a lot to keep a whole family fed, et cetera. And there were letters exchanged, and they actually discovered it was cheaper. Why not make everyone a slave who doesn't know that they're a slave?
A wage slave.
Right.
And think only about the welfare idea. If you have a plantation family and you require harmony, even though some people are very subordinate, if somebody gets sick or too old to work, you can't, in fact, do the Simon Legree bit and get rid of them, or what happens is morale collapses. So you have to care for them. The discussions on the highest level among Northern industrialists, why should we have to support Deadwood here? And we could do that if they were wage slaves. Yeah. And furthermore, people like Count Tolstoy was well aware of the hardcore underneath the romantic arguments, and so were a number of other people. But the public, dependent upon media and pulpits, which were subsidized by the owners, they couldn't find a zone where they could think clearly, or someone would say, yeah, here's the truth, think about it.
Early forms of mass media propaganda from the pulpit or the newspaper.
Or the Chautauquas. Right. Oh, absolutely. The Chautauquas were put together by intense... The family that began Harper's Publishers and had the very prestigious journal of the time, Harper's Weekly.
Louis Lapham, the Lapham family?
Well, Lapham's a very latter day.
His grandfather was in charge of Harper's, though, and he was mayor of San Francisco, I believe.
Mayor, he was. When the UN came in, he told me that his boyhood was filled with foreign dignitaries in the home as house guests or throwing back a glass of wine. So you can actually trace the small number of families behind the Chautauquas, which were the most compelling mass media of the day. And you'd hear about what was going on in Boston, out in Cincinnati, and you'd want that. And selectively, ideas and ways of thinking were introduced to the best people, and they used their local prestige to make sure that, it's a natural process. So what we got was a second American Revolution between, 1865 and about 1910. This time the British won again, but they didn't win by force of arms, but by force of insight into the way opinion is created. And when the skilled workers who had intense pride and really were the key to the prosperity of early industrial operation, commercial operation, when the skilled workers understood their power, then industry and commerce were mechanized intensely, and you wiped out the need for skill. You took less quality, but now you had less contention, less argument. Carnegie was instrumental in eliminating the influence of skilled labor, and it continued right through the 20th century.
What influence have the Rockefellers had on organized labor, skilled labor, education?
The Rockefeller family can actually be traced way back in Dutch history. There's an ancestor of the Rockefellers who set up a rather detailed plan for global government hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And it was one of these flow charts that showed how you were going to do that or not. But or the great irony, of course, is that Rockefeller and Carnegie's families were fringe people in the United States, but using their brilliant insight into leverage and how it works, both were able to take nothing and pyramid it into quite a bit. Rockefeller actually, his father, I believe, but it may have been his grandfather, fled a rape charge, sort of like Strauss-Kahn's up in Bainbridge, New York. He had been charged with rape of a maid and fled. They threw Rockefeller threw their weight behind, this is emblematic of how they were, behind Horatio Alger, who also had been charged with rape up here in Connecticut, in the Newsboys Lodging House. And if you read a wonderful book that exists, a limited edition, but it's kept continuously in print, called The Rise of the Dangerous Classes in New York City by the creator of American Adoption. When I started to research school, I kept running into the same people who put the adoption institution together and the school institute, one much more important than the other, but still the same names float in and out of one another. Charles Loring Brace, who I believe his father was the publisher of the Hartford Courant. I'm almost sure in his early diaries say, I must find a way to become nationally famous. I mean, in Yale, he wrote that he didn't have any idea how he was going to do that. But finally, it occurred to him that with these masses of immigrants being brought in to break the Irish labor monopoly in the mines and the mills, that the easiest way to lower the unit cost of labor was to bring the husband and the wife into the labor force. You double the size of the labor force, you cut the unit value of the labor in half. But you couldn't do that as long as they were worried about their kids. So now you have the impetus to enlarge the social work industry, to corrupt the legislatures, to give it the power to break families apart. And what do you do with the kids? Well, the expression put up for adoption tells you you don't want them anywhere in the neighborhood. You want them far away. So you put them in boxcars. This great secret monstrous event in American history that goes on for 40, 50 years. Boxcars full of the children of the labor sent west. They started upstate New York. That was too close. So they kept going farther and farther west. And then they'd stop at a whistle stop and a platform would be brought out. The boxcar would open. The children would be put up for adoption. They had a preference for who they wanted to adopt. They wanted Lutherans to adopt because they had the Episcopal idea of hierarchy, but they were just dumb farmers. They couldn't think clearly. Here was free labor, hey, and that will end the future career of these immigrants. What stopped putting children up for adoption was the police chiefs of the West. I think the year was 1888, but give me a few years either way. They wrote a stinging attack on this practice, not on moral grounds, but they said crime is everywhere in the West. And if you go to the psychological abstracts, you'll find that an enormous number of adopted children, for example, 6 of the 10 leading mass murders in American history, but all forms of crime, because when you break the bond with the natural, you can't put substitutes in place. Again, not morally. There's a recent physiological theory called mirror neurons, that you learn to use your own biological equipment by watching people who have the same or nearly identical biological. When you remove that, even if the family that you're transferred to has money and savoir-faire and civil, they're more civil, doesn't matter. You're actually imitating things that your physiology can accommodate. As a consequence, you get incrementally more and more crazed inside and angry. One of the things, of course, school does is it prevents these kind of connections between different areas from occurring. That's what the short answer test is about. And Oxford and Cambridge got rid of it 100 years ago. 100 years ago, because they said people who do well on short answer tests, they memorize bits of information, but they don't connect the bits of information. And when they seem to be able to connect the bits of information, it's because they've memorized someone else's connections. The better the school, the more sets of connections you memorize. But you can't do that for yourself. You know, it's like these machines where you guys are all too young to remember. They used to sell machines that would relieve the stress of lifting weights. You'd put the weight in your hand, but the machine would lift your arm in the way. Only trouble was your muscle knew the difference. But the people buying the machinery didn't. Well, it looks exactly the same. Anyway, I put me back on course here.
Is there any connection between frustration and aggression? And what effect does schooling have on that?
Well, you answer your own question by asking it. The connection's intimate. School removes your volition in all important ways. Even who you speak to. Are not the arts of association as valuable or more valuable than anything else you learn when you're young? I read how executive hiring is done, and it almost never has to do with your training in whatever you're being hired for. Is this the I'm thinking of Apple now, I believe. Is this the person we would like to have around 3 years from now? And bend an elbow with, or play golf with, or just talk with? I mean, and that's why you're passed from set of executives, so they can sign off, yeah, he's okay, we can, but we don't tell kids that, right? It's people who have the highest grade point average and the highest SAT scores. Well, I spent an hour not so long ago, within 10 years, with the admissions officer for Harvard College, and about 30 years ago, an hour with the admissions director at Princeton. And let me tell you, their polite dismissal of grades and SAT scores was intimidating to listen to, as if you'd have to be crazy to let somebody in. Let me see if I can condense how you get into Harvard or Princeton. Of course, you get into both by donating a building, but how do other people get in? They're being analyzed on the basis of their ability to either become wealthy or famous. Either one will work. Famous, like wearing a billboard saying, I went to Princeton. There's that actress Jodie Foster. I went to Princeton. Look at where the rest of the actors and directors went. They didn't go anywhere, but Jodie did. So that's one we hear about. It's the Harvard lady said, we look for a record of excellence. And what does excellence consist of? It's sometime in the first 18 years of your life, figuring out how to add value to the people around you. Although I shouldn't say this, in a way that catches public attention. So you might walk across the United States or bicycle the perimeter of the country or row across the Atlantic Ocean. Those are physical ways. You might start a little charity or set up some weather service or some pollution monitoring around Hartford. There are a substantial number, a small fraction, but a substantial number of kids doing this as we sit here. They're writing a record of being able to add value to the community around them. And then the other fellow, the Princeton guy, said the same thing in different words. I asked him, this about 68 roughly. I asked him, what part of a resume submitted do you look at first? And the answer metaphorically caused my jaw to open. Hobbies, he said. I said, I've been taught all my life, leave that off because it's not germane. He said, on the contrary, it's the only honest information you're likely to get. How does someone spend their time when it's their free choice to spend? He said it's a window into their mind and their heart. Well, what kind of hobbies? He said, well, ideally someone would have a physical hobby, an intellectual hobby, and a social hobby, because that would show they're exploring these large. Well, physical hobby, you mean football, baseball? Well, he said, it's better than nothing, but we would prefer not to see teams. As I've been told all my life, that team sports identify your ability to work in a team. He said, what happens in a team sport is if you decide to dog it, it's very hard to tell which guy on the line has dogged it or not, or which running back has gone down quicker than he should have gone down. There, he said, we prefer solo hobbies that involve physical danger. You mean you want kids to put their necks at risk? For example, what? I said. He said, well, horseback riding is a dead giveaway. The horse weighs a half a ton or more. If you do trail riding, you don't know what you're doing. Your head gets caught on a branch, and you're the headless horseman. If the horse doesn't like you, it'll roll over on top of you, and I know immediately, because that last time I rode a horse was down in Veracruz, Mexico. The horse didn't like me, took me out on the main highway with crazed Mexican drivers going 100 miles an hour in 18-wheelers, and it laid down on top of me. I was terrified because I could see these trucks coming. Didn't like that was the last time I rode. So he said, you have to actually know what you're doing. You can't say, is this an A job or a B job? If you live and are intact, it is. Then he said, sailing a small boat, these little 12-footers outside of land. If you don't know what you're doing, you end up in the middle of the Atlantic, or if wind comes up, you can't see landmarks because of the waves. I said, but those things are associated with the prosperous classes. What could somebody in ordinary circumstances do? He said, well, we just let somebody in. This is probably one of the nicest factoids in my mind, in my life. We just let someone in who invented his own sport and kept records competing against himself, his past performance, his present performance. It was, get ready for this, visualize this, seatless unicycle riding over broken terrain. If I had 10 lifetimes, the thought of doing that wouldn't occur. Started getting on a unicycle, let alone one without a seat, let alone riding it over broken terrain. So they let him in because they knew he was on the fast track. So we tell these lies, and of course many of the people who tell the lies believe the lies. Well, surely they're going to take valedictorians. Well, last year Harvard turned down 8 out of every 10 valedictorians who applied, and the 2 they took in, they didn't take in because they were valedictorians there. So by removing this component from the student imagination, you can control to some extent who even applies to Harvard and then who gets in, who applies, because they don't know what they're doing. What's the IT garbage in, garbage out? So what I would do was I would examine. I have a friend who started a tutoring service called the Princeton Review, and 20 years ago, they were charging $300 an hour. I have no idea what they charge now. But what they did was crack the code of the questions on standardized tests. And Adam Robinson was his name. Adam took his money and left the Princeton Review to his partner. But Adam has written a book well worth, I think, your group looking up, called What Smart Students Know, Random House, What Smart Students Know. Adam was certain that you could pass standardized tests without having any knowledge of the subject, as long as you understood the constraints, the question architects were under. For example, 2 of the 4 answers offered are always so absurd that if you know that, now you're left with a 50-50 guess. I had figured out when I was in high school that if you had some way to measure the angles on the little geometric figures on the test, that you didn't need to know. You could arrive at the answer simply by, simplistic means. The evidence that all of us know standardized tests don't measure what they claim to measure is that nobody you encounter on the upper reaches of society would dream of hiring somebody on the basis of those tests or in grade point averages. You'd be playing Russian roulette because they measure nothing. The grades largely measure that you memorize what you're told to memorize. I mean, there are a few other things, but that's the heart of it. So now you know you have somebody obedient, and probably for a clerk, that is a good measure. Not for someone who has to adapt to changing circumstances, by the natural selection process of reality. It's fairly easy without being a wise guy or very learned, as long as you retain the ability to think independently from the data in front of you, to penetrate the masks, the contentions that don't conform to everyday reality. So no one will hire you as a CEO and ask you what you're saying. But if you examine the data that's available about big-time politicians, now we have, and I don't think it surprised anybody, that George Bush, the most recent one, was a C average in high school, prep school, and a C average at Yale. What does surprise people is that the candidate he ran against was a C average in prep school and a C average at Yale and a lower C average than George Bush's on the Kerry of Massachusetts. The fact that the best evidence that the nation has been schooled to the point of extinction is that they were fraternity brothers at Yale in a fraternity. I'll skip its interesting reputation. It only has 15 members. And they were fraternity brothers at Yale. There's 308 million of us. I mean, mathematically, I wouldn't know how to set the odds, but they would be stupendous. No one mentioned it, or if they did, it was to quickly get over that. That should have been headlines of the New York Times and the Washington Post. Fraternity brothers at Yale run for president. You wouldn't need to mention that it was the Skull and Bones fraternity. So when the skew from sanity is that of that magnitude, you should not expect much to come from the watchdogs of our liberty and our best interests. How could that happen unless, but there's a Jewish expression, chutzpah, unless this feeling of contempt for ordinary people was very dramatic. I'm sure someone in the councils were allowed that to happen, said, maybe someone will notice. To dismiss that shows you how powerless. To believe, for example, another example, that the recent banking crisis, the real estate bubble, it is an oddity in American banking. There have been 5 such since 1961, savings and loan, technology bubble. There have been 5 of those, and the central figure in all 5 is the Citibank of New York. Now, sometimes it's called First National. That's back in 61. Then it becomes Citibank. Then it merges with another huge and it becomes Citigroup. But the mentality loose on that level shows utter contempt for the safeguards built into, the founding documents, or built into tradition as ordinary people, and that includes upper middle class ordinary people, expect it to be. It doesn't exist. Now, what we've run into is a people infinitely more sophisticated than us, with a 5,000-year civilization, who are even more amoral than we are, and look at starving 3 million people to death as they did 20 years ago. Is there any shortage of people? I mean, they're already running circles. I've spoken in China 6 times for various groups, and the Chinese government is a little bit worried, not a lot, that their system of schooling, very like ours, except more disciplined, it seems to constrain the inventive imagination. The reason they're not worried is they don't recognize copyright law or patent law, so they have access to anything there. But they will not accept, they keep asking me back, they will not accept that the system they're applying to the young mind is guaranteed to foreclose the imagination that produces invention. So I'm happy to take their money and get a chance to see Xi'an and Shanghai and Beijing, but they will follow the course we follow. It'll just take a little bit longer, that's all. Your turn.
In China, they have the outcome-based education system, but they're seeking to tweak it so that they can kind of improve it. They said that we want to keep our people under control, but we want them to be more creative and productive and efficient and happy while they're doing it, right? Now, the question is, if America has become more incoherent, wouldn't that be a function of the Prussian education system, outcome-based education, being used to control the workers and make more profits, and now it's just run its course?
It's run its course. We're exhausted now. Our schooling is exhausted, and the national vitality's been exhausted. I'm glad you used the term incoherence. About 3 or 4 years ago, the Financial Times of London, on the editorial page, accused us of being you may have read the same piece I did, an incoherent society, that we had lost a reason to be a nation at all, because subsidizing bankers and drug companies wasn't a sufficient reason to proceed in history. Yeah, we're incoherent. Nation comes from the root, family. And we no longer have a concern other than a rhetorical concern with one another. I mean, obviously there are many individual exceptions to that, but the government clearly has no such concern. We have evolved an economy that depends upon constant warfare. And even though it was stretching it in Iraq and Afghanistan, when those are over, we must have another conflict. We're going to have to stretch it even further and maybe attack small islands, Fiji maybe, because they represent a menace. Being a child of World War II, the idea of calling something a war where the enemy has no Army, Navy, Air Force, intelligence service, where they blow up their feet in their underwear, it just stretches the bounds of the ridiculous to call it a war. But we got an object lesson from a television comedian who said, when you fly planes into a building, it certainly shows you have courage. And that was temporarily the end of his career. You do not speak in opposition to the main force driving events. To look at America between, let me roughly say, 1800 and 1865, and then from momentum right up to the First World War, there's this explosion of invention, and it comes from the unlikeliest places. It does not come from university-trained inventors. It comes from everywhere. It's the way people saw the world around them. They saw this world, the elements, the raw material. They processed it a slightly different way, and then they had the the rhetorical capacity to say, hey, look, there's a better way to do this. It was happening so frequently that a crisis occurred in capitalism. And without understanding this crisis, you really can't understand why our schools are the product of the Rockefeller family, the Carnegie family, the Astor family, the Vanderbilt family, the great capitalist families. They understood that the real problem in successful capitalism is assembling capital, getting people to give you their savings on the promise that you'll give them more back. But if you have people in an inventive matrix who can look at the way the expensive businesses doing things open up across the street and either do it cheaper or better or simply open up somewhere else where no one is doing it, capital is always at great risk. So oddly enough, I don't want to claim credit for what really is a brilliant insight, but I want to crave credit. It was openly discussed, let me say, from 1880 to 1900. We were being forcibly converted from an economy of small farmers, small engineers, entrepreneurs, into a corporate economy. And these men doing it, they weren't intellectual dumbcoffs. They could see that as long as the American inventiveness was loose like a wild beast, they were going to have a lot of trouble pulling. Someone would say, but I saw, Jack, and he went belly up. So Prussian schooling, which had, for a different reason, had been out to destroy the imagination. And let me say to anyone listening to this, when someone makes a reckless statement like that, you make sure they can document it. And I will document it as long as you're willing to walk to your local public library. Because in every public library worth its salt in the United States and in every college library, you will find a collection of essays by a Prussian philosopher, Johann Fichte, who was the immediate heir to the University of Berlin's philosophy department, which had been under Immanuel Kant. Fichte wrote a series of, it was over a dozen public essays to the Prussian king from, let me say 1808 to about 1818. They're called Addresses to the German Nation. And the provocative event that set the first one off was the Prussian army, which was the Prussian economy, renting soldiers, stealing other people's stuff, had been whipped by Napoleon's amateur army at the Battle of Jena in 1806. And Fichte said it was because this demon imagination was loose among ordinary soldiers, and in situations they would override the orders from headquarters about what to do, and that's why we lost. Now, what should fascinate anyone listening is that's exactly what the so-called liberal philosopher Spinoza in Holland had said in 1690 in a book called Tractatus Religico-Politicus. Tractatus Religico-Politicus. Spinoza said that the ordinary population was so psychologically diseased, murderously so, there was no way to heal it. Just as Fichte, 125 years later, said there was no way to heal the disobedience gene in people who thought for themselves. Fichte said we have to set up a system of forced schooling, universal forced schooling, in which we destroy the imagination. Bells, ordered lessons, constant testing, rankings. Now, if it were only those two major figures, but you now can go back a few hundred years in history to John Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion, which is this thick, tiny print. But if you ever go mad and actually force yourself to read it, rather than to read what an encyclopedia tells you it says, you'll find that Calvin says that the saved are saved before they're born. The damned, who are 19 to 1, are damned before they're born, and no amount of good work or behavior can save the damned, and no amount of evil behavior can damn the saved. The expression that used to be pretty common, but has vanished, I think on purpose, is justified sinners. The saved are justified sinners who can do anything. They can carpet bomb civilian populations, whether they're Nazis or Americans. You know, you've done no harm, according to Calvin. Calvin said the only way the elect, he called the saved, the elect will ever be safe because they're outnumbered so heavily, is to set up a system of universal compulsion schooling with the intention of destroying the imagination and filling the head with garbage. Spinoza said the same thing. Fichte said the same thing.
I think we just ran out of tape. Is that what happened? Is that one still running?
Yes,
but it has no micro. All right. So we're going to take a 10-minute break.
Oh, good.
We're going to change the tapes. We're going to turn all these lights out. We're going to turn the AC back on and cool you off. If you want to get up and move around, use the bathroom.
All right, guys. That was the first hour of John Taylor Gatto. We're almost at the end. I think we got some time for some music. Buckerfish.
Been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
The CFR exists, the Trilateral Commission. Secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society.
I feel nothing but pain and misery. You these dreams that find me. I can see right through you and what you do.
Alright guys, that was one more of Poker Face. I actually didn't finish yet though. That was a break, right? Bit of a long one. Before the thing cuts me off, I want to thank everybody for listening. People in the chat. And on Desert, Hopper, JJ, Joe, Jules, Vince, and Urky. Lots of disheartening links being posted there about nuclear stuff. One of them, catastrophe at Ukraine Zaporozhye nuclear power plant with a question mark. This is from globalresearch.ca. Now, I don't think that is a bad source, but, you know, things still need to be verified. Over the last week, more publications, including Zero Hedge, which is also not a bad source, have started reporting on a still developing nuclear problem at the largest nuclear plant in Europe. Alright, I didn't even know that was in Europe. You know, Ukraine sounds to me like Russia, which is Asia, not Europe, but whatever. This news has been widely circulated in Eastern Europe over the last few weeks, has it now? The problem in Ukraine has been and remains verification. Ukrainian sources have not been forthcoming. Yeah. Well, they would have something to gain by not telling, right? When this first occurred, I was contacted through a second party and told directly after the officially reported transformer incident that a radiation spike was observed in Crimea, which is 140 kilometers away from the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. What the heck was that?
Just blow your mind tonight. I'm so hyped, but it's no hype from this.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically.
That is my tune. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. See you guys next week. Take care.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.